Great. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming to the first of our monthly postgraduate mentoring meetings. These are a direct result of you lobbying us. So the PSA said that we didn't have enough meetings where we all got together as a faculty and came together, and particularly there weren't enough meetings where we talked about things that are of general interest to all postgraduate students in the faculty. So we're doing this for you, and I hope that you will spread the word around to the other. There's 250 of us doing postgraduate studies in the arts faculty. And it would be great to get a really good group coming together monthly to talk about things that are of common interest. This has been made partly possible by the appointment of 2 new assistant deans or a director of innovation, David Glance, who many of you will have seen on the Facebook site regularly. Posting. David has single-handedly solved 2 of our long-standing problems in the past week. One of them is that you will no longer just be a number, but as of 2 weeks' time, you will be able to be a name at uwa.edu.au, which is fantastic. So you will have your own email address with your own name on it. And that's something that we were lobbied very hard last year. I was lobbied very hard last year by at least 100 people. And it is so good that within 2 weeks of taking office, David has made this happen with a little bit of help.
I can't claim credit. All I did was push them to actually announce it, but Robyn was the one who...
So someone else in this room is also to thank for this, and it's really great that we have Robyn Owens here as our first speaker. I mean, how could we start a series better than by having the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research here to speak to us? So thank you so much for agreeing to speak. As I say, these meetings will be monthly. Every month we will have one. We can't always get this room on Thursday, so it looks like we may shift to Fridays and Friday lunchtime. I hope that Friday lunchtime will be possible. But I'll be canvassing as to whether Friday lunchtimes is good. We've managed to get this room most Friday lunchtimes. A couple of other quick announcements. We're going to have a postgraduate sundowner. This is a sort of a booze and chat meeting. That's for everyone, every postgraduate in the arts faculty, and we're going to have that on the Trish Crawford lawns or court. That's the lawn area outside the Dean's office in the Humanities building. And we'll have that on the 21st of March, so please put that in your diaries, between 5 and 7. That's just a meet and greet for all of the new postgrads, but I hope all of the existing postgrads will come along to meet and greet the new postgrads. We're also going to start, as this is another thing in relation to the PSA, people felt that there hadn't been adequate orientation within the arts faculty. Maybe humanities were rather good at their orientations, but social sciences, where I come from, were woefully inadequate in their orientation. So we've initiated a formal orientation for all new postgraduate art students. And if any old students would like to come along to see how that goes and to help us make that a really special event, we'd really appreciate that as well. That's on the 2nd of May. We're doing it a little bit later so that we catch all of the new students who are arriving. And I think, as we've agreed, we'll probably do that twice a year as well to catch students that come in mid-year. And I've made budgetary allowance. Not that we have much budget, but I've put aside some of the little we have to make that possible. Those are the main announcements. It's with great pleasure, then, that we start our first monthly mentorship meeting with the most prestigious speaker. Someone that you all know as the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research, but also very known for her own research in lactation and in 3D facial imaging. And it's an absolute pleasure. She said that she's willing to be interrupted at any point if you have questions. We'll also try and leave a little bit of time, maybe 5-10 minutes at the end, for questions. Over to you, Robyn.
Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you very much for inviting me down here this afternoon. I didn't realise I was the first speaker in the first series. It's fantastic to see this group together as a cohort. 3 of us here at least have actually finished a PhD, so it is possible to come out the end. You might not believe it. When you do come out the end, you realise really how unhelpful your supervisor was, and probably just about everybody else except your cohort. And so I really do encourage you to get together and talk to each other, seed each other's theses with lots of ideas. Our cohort experience is absolutely a fantastic thing to have as part of your PhD. Right, so I had very minimal instructions to come down and talk to you today about something and related to publishing of some sort or other, but I thought I'd take the big picture approach today at least, and try and give you some idea of some of the things that I grapple with up in the research office, and why, in my opinion, the humanities matter so much to this university, and what you do matters so much to what this university is trying to achieve. So, I now have a presentation. I have to put my glasses on so I can read what I'm actually going to say. So I'm going to say some things that might sound like motherhood statements to you, and you wonder why on earth the university keeps saying these things. We are a comprehensive, research-intensive university. Most people would say, well, what other kind of university is there, really? Well, there are lots of other kinds of universities. There are institutes of technology. There are teaching-only universities. There are postgraduate-only universities. There are undergraduate-only universities, etc. So this university has carved out the sort of university it wants to be. Comprehensive means we intend to create and share knowledge across all the major discipline fields, and that includes the humanities and social sciences. That means that you matter. Just for that one word, comprehensive, you matter. Research intensive means that we want research to happen everywhere. We're not going to be a university that just has 3 research areas and then everything else is a great big cash cow to fund those 3 research areas. We want research to be happening in all the faculties and in all of the professions. And what's not there is the notion that we are really an international university. We've been focused on this international idea for many, many years. The new VC has sort of flipped it around a little bit to say, yes, we are an international university that just happens to be situated in Perth, not a university in Perth that wants to be international, right? We're already there. In fact, one of the things I will be talking about today is the grand aims of the university and rankings and quality assurance or quality assessment, etc. And one of the recent rankings that did come out by the Times Higher Education group ranked UWA in the top 25 most international universities in the world. We came in at position 18. Pretty amazing, I thought. I'll tell you how we did it later. Okay, so I thought I'd start off with just some values. So the university is 101 years old. It was founded by an act that was established in 1911, and back in 1911 somebody had the sense to write a mission statement for a university. I don't think they even existed in those days, but we got one: to advance the wealth and prosperity of the people, which is pretty amazing. In fact, it's really the welfare and prosperity of the people, so I've already made a typo in today's presentation. It's about advancing the benefit of our society in which we live, the communities that we serve. And in those days, of course, it was very much a little fledgling city of Perth in Australia, and today we think about the people as being the whole world. So what we really want to do through our teaching, through our research, and through our engagement with the community is to try and make the world a better place. It's a pretty great mission that we have. And the sort of research that we want to do is not just new knowledge, but high quality research that the rest of the world cares about. And so that notion that our university is one that creates new knowledge of high quality that the rest of the world cares about means that we have to test all the time, how do we know that the work that we do is high quality? How do we know that we're operating at the top level that we can be internationally? And then how do we know that the rest of the world cares about what we do? 100 years ago, or even more, if you published a paper, the word published meant to make public. Generally, people read it. Now, if you publish a paper, it generally means, oh, yippee, another 3 lines on my CV, it's buried in a library somewhere, and hopefully nobody will ever read it. Is that right? Is everybody busily polishing up their CVs? No. What we would like is, of course, for the rest of the world to read our work, and for that work to make a difference to the rest of the world. So publishing is the first step of making public our work, and I know many of you are thinking about other ways in which we can make our work public. Okay, so I'm just going to carry on with this rhetoric that you often hear from up there, sometimes called the university. But hey, this is the university down and that is that UWA is aiming to be a top 50 university by 2050. And you'll hear a lot of rhetoric about how fantastic it is that we're a top 100 university already. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time just telling you what that means and how is it measured. And, really, does it make any sense at all? And how many universities are there in the world anyhow? Anybody want to take a guess at how many universities there might be? Okay, I'll take that to mean no. Nobody knows the answer, so there's not a right answer or a wrong answer. But roughly, people estimate about 10,000 at the moment. So being in the top 100 is pretty good. Of course, it's only on one ranking system that we're there. And a lot of people will poo-poo these things. How could you take something that's really about values and that's been around for thousands of years and turn it into a number, like it was the World Cup soccer or the Rottnest swim and who came 87th and who came first, etc. And I agree that it's, sometimes can seem to be quite demeaning of the sort of quality of work that we do. But these things create reputation. And reputation changes the way in which something evolves. So whether the number 91 means anything at all scientifically, it means something in the minds of people who are coming to this university and who interact with this university and who will come in the future. And the fact that we can move ahead in the global scale and be better known in the global scale means something for the future of this university and where it will be perceived. So I want to talk a little bit about this top 100 goal. So the top 100 goal is a measure around a particular ranking system called the Academic Rankings of World Universities. It was originally called the Shanghai Jiaotong ranking system because it was invented at the Shanghai Jiaotong University in Shanghai. And it was invented by a professor of chemical engineering when his president, his Vice-Chancellor, said to him, "What makes a world-class university?" And this was only back in the early 2000s. As a typical engineer, he went away and said, what makes a world-class university? What data do I have? What can I measure? And he put together a ranking system. It was first published in 2005, and it hit the world by storm because before that, nobody had ever thought of ranking universities and whether it made any difference at all. And of course, as soon as the results were published, everybody spent all their time criticising it. But nevertheless, even though they criticised it, they really cared about the answers as well. And they couldn't really deny the fact that the universities that were sort of at the top were pretty good universities. And certainly the ones that were not quite at the top but within QE definitely started thinking about what do I need to do to get closer to the top. Okay, so when it first came out in 2005, we came in at position 179. So if you came in 179th at the Rottnest swim, would that be good? I've got no idea how many people go in the Rottnest swim. No? Nobody here's a swimmer? Me neither. Okay. Anyhow, let's say it's 1,000 people. Sounds reasonable. 179. It's not too bad, is it? Might try a bit harder next year. Don't expect to come first, but I might try a bit harder and see if I went ahead. So what happened, though, in 2005 is something that was a once-in-my-academic lifetime event, and that was that an academic at our university won the Nobel Prize. This is Professor Barry Marshall, who did his work on stomach ulcers. And winning Nobel Prizes was one of the measures that was used in determining world-class universities, and we shot up the rankings to position 121, I think, in the next year. And that really started a whole series of work around, well, what would we really need to do to shape the university to get into the top 100? And in particular, could we actually do it by our 100th birthday that was coming up pretty soon? Because wouldn't it be cool to be in the top 100 by the time you turned 100? Okay, so a lot of work was done, but let me just show you exactly what they do on this particular ranking. So you'll hear a lot about this particular one because it's the one that's been around the longest and it's the most reputed of the lot. So first of all, by looking at all those indicators, I'm sure you're all very bright and you'll say, oh, that's great, but it's all about science. What does it mean to us? Well, not exactly all about science, but let's look at it. So first of all, this ranking only looks at data that's available in publicly available databases. One of those is the list of all the Nobel laureates and Fields medalists in the world. What's a Fields medalist? A Fields medalist is somebody who wins a great big prize in mathematics. And the reason that's there is because mathematicians can't win Nobel Prizes. And the reason mathematicians can't win Nobel Prizes is because Alfred Nobel's wife ran off with a mathematician. In fact, many mathematicians win Nobel Prizes. They do it through economics. Anybody who's seen the movie A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe would have seen a mathematician win a Nobel Prize. Okay, so anyhow, whatever they are, and there are lots of other prizes in academic world, the Nobel Prizes and Fields Medals are very highly regarded as big prizes. So you get 10% of your total score if one of your students wins a Nobel Prize, and a student is counted as anybody who was at your university as an undergraduate or a master's student or a postgraduate. And students wander around, so when somebody wins a Nobel Prize, 2 or 3 universities can win on that particular parameter. A staff member winning a Nobel Prize is somebody who has to be a staff member at the time of winning it. Many Nobel laureates have already retired at the time they win, so that bit doesn't count if they came from your university. We were really lucky because Barry was a student with us, born in Kalgoorlie, did his first degree at UWA, and he was a staff member at the time he won the prize as well. Okay, the next thing they do is look at a category of people called highly cited researchers. So the Web of Science divides the world up into 21 broad categories of study, including social science research. So certainly economics is one of them, psychology is another, and there are various other bits of political science. Law is another. So they, and then they measure the most highly cited researchers in those categories. Of course, depending on your category, it's a different number of citations that would be required to be in the top 250 most cited people in the world, because different disciplines cite at different rates. But nevertheless, they have a list of these highly cited people. Then they take 2 very prestigious journals, Nature and Science, and they work out which universities have had publications in these journals. You might think that's a bit sort of scientific, and of course it is mostly biased towards the sciences, but I have certainly seen papers in science from a music department, talking about the way in which harmonies have developed. We have certainly had a nature paper from our anthropology group, so it is possible from this side of the oval to get papers in nature and science. Then the next one is just a total volume of journal papers that are published by different universities. And of course, the bigger you are and the more people are publishing, the more papers that come out. So they look at all the papers that are published in the Science Citation Index and the Social Sciences Citation Index for the previous year. So the more a university publishes, the more it gets of that score. And then they have a moderating score at the end to take into account the size of universities, because universities vary dramatically. In Australia, Monash is the largest university with about 70,000 students. And then we have some universities that are very small. Princeton, for example, in the United States is a very small university, smaller than UWA. So you want to take into account a moderating factor there. Okay, so that's one of the ranking systems. What we actually do is monitor how we're going in lots of different ranking systems. So the red one is the academic ranking of world universities. It started at 179. We shot up. Then we started to decline a little bit because we hadn't figured out what we really needed to do. And the reason that if you don't do anything, you're going to go backwards is because certain indicators fade with time. And particularly the Nobel laureate prizes things, each year somebody else wins a Nobel Prize and some universities then end up with more Nobel laureates, so you have a smaller proportion than they do. And as time goes by, they are weighted less and less. But you can see that we've turned it around a little bit in 2012, 96, 2013, 91, and we hope to improve further. The other rankings, the NTU one comes from the National Taiwanese University. It measures publications, citations, and a few other indicators. QS and Times were the same indicator up till 2008. The company split into two and developed two separate methodologies. On the QS methodology, the grey one at the top, we've stayed pretty much in the 75 to 80 range. In the Times one, we've dropped down a little bit and are now working our way up. And the final one, the blue one, is a ranking system that comes from the Elsevier group, Scimago, and it is measuring indicators around research productivity, citations, highly cited papers, papers in the top journals, etc., as indexed by the Elsevier database, Scopus. So the databases that are used are things like the Nobel Laureates database, or data that comes out of Thomson Reuters Web of Knowledge, based in the United States, or data that's coming out of the Scopus database that's from the Elsevier group in Europe. Well, the Nobel Prize thing only appears in the academic ranking of world universities. It's not in any of the other indicators. And the two publication databases are not perfect indexes of everything that ever gets published. They mostly index journal papers, not all the books, not all the book chapters, not all the conference papers, and certainly not lots of other things like, you know, articles in newspapers or encyclopedia entries or various other things. So not everything that academics produce gets measured, but most of what academics produce through journal articles is indexed because these two major databases index vast numbers of journals. Okay, so the other rankings use different sorts of data, different databases, different sorts of publications. Some count citations, and some of them have tried to bring into account a teaching parameter of ranking universities because the Shanghai Jiaotong one is very much research focused. So they start measuring things. Now, it's hard to measure teaching. What do you measure if you're trying to measure how good a university is in teaching? But they measure things like staff student numbers, they measure the proportion of international students. Two of them, the QS and Times, use surveys. So they've moved into the whole opinion side of things now. And instead of just looking at data and saying what is, they've set up this other side of the equation is what do you think is the truth? And now you've got this whole issue about reputation and branding and marketing coming into effect. So QS and Times ask employers and other academics, what do you think of the research that comes out of University X? Or what do you think of the graduates that come out of University X? How employable they are, etc. And you can see that there's going to be this cycle now between the results that come out on these rankings and what people might think. And so that's going to impact on that as well. Okay, let me just show you how that can have quite a big impact. We've done a little bit of work on the difference between Sydney and UWA in some of the opinion-based rankings. So let's look at the overall rankings. So on the academic rankings of world universities, this was back in 2012, Sydney was 93 and we were 96. On the Taiwanese one, there was a massive difference between the two of us. On the QS, there was a difference. Sydney was up at 39 and we were 79. And on the Times, there was a massive difference between the two of us. If you're a scientist, you'd say, gosh, you know, these measuring instruments are terrible. They're not telling us anything. Or what are they telling us? Who would know? Let's go on and have a look and see at what happens in some of the indicators. So in the teaching indicators for the Times, they look at staff student numbers. Between us and University of Sydney, not much difference. Doctorates awarded per undergraduate degrees awarded, not much difference. Doctorates awarded per academic staff, not much difference. What do the academics think of the two universities? Sydney wins. What's the overall teaching score? Sydney wins. So now you can begin to see how these opinion surveys are affecting things. And anybody who's into any marketing or opinion-based material would realise, first of all, Sydney has a big advantage over UWA. That's because it's in Sydney and we're in Perth. So if you're an academic in India that's being asked, what do you think of the universities in Australia, you probably more likely have heard of Sydney than you've heard of Perth, because you probably haven't been to either university. So opinion really matters. Let's look at the research indicators. On citations, not much difference. Academic papers per academic and research staff, not much difference. Research income, a little bit of difference. Academic reputation, big difference. Overall score, Sydney wins. So in the Times and QS rankings, reputation matters. Okay, so that's rankings. That's one thing that happens out there in the world. Inside, in Australia, the Australian government has decided, these universities are expensive beasts. I wonder how good the work is that they do. That's always code for we're going to cut, but we don't know where we're going to cut, so we better try and do some measurement to see what we're going to do. So they've asked the ARC to evaluate the quality of the research that goes on in Australian universities. And we've had 2 rounds of this so far. I can tell you it's a vast amount of work because we have to collect lots and lots of data and submit it to evaluating panels. In the end, though, these panels use a measuring instrument that's got 5 points on it. So what we're trying to figure out here is the work that is done at world average, above, well above, below world average, or well below. So once you start thinking about how on earth would you do an exercise like this, there are a lot of things that have to be taken into consideration. What are you actually going to measure? In the United Kingdom, where they do the same thing, Ben might be familiar with this, what they measure is academic departments. So they pit one English department against another English department and look at what comes out of those departments. In New Zealand, where they do the same thing, they pitch individuals against each other. So they measure the output of individual academics and determine what they're like. In Australia, what they've done is done it by fields of research. So in this particular case, say they take something like political science as a field of research, they look at the university's complete output in political science. And that doesn't necessarily all come from the political science department. It might come from the law department, or it might come from the industrial relations department, or a few other things as well. So, so first of all, we have to sort all of the data into different fields. So I've just looked at some of the fields relating to the areas in the humanities and social sciences. So there are 22 broad fields, and each of these broad fields has a number of subcategories. So one of them, 16, is studies in human society, and there are 8 different sub-areas and another catch-all for everything that's left over. So anthropology is a sub-area. The ones that I've highlighted in bold there are areas that we submitted for evaluation. And in order to submit a field for evaluation, the university has to have at least 50 papers in that field over a 6-year window. So anthropology, we had more than 50 papers over a 6-year window. And how do you get in anthropology or not? Well, it depends on whether you're publishing in anthropology journals or you've coded your work as anthropology. Okay, so there are those. In 19, that studies in creative arts, we submitted in art theory and criticism and performing arts and creative writing. In 20, which is language, communications and culture, we submitted in cultural studies, linguistics and literary studies. And in 21, we submitted in archaeology and historical studies. And in 22, we submitted in philosophy. So all these codes, there's 157 subcodes. Each university had to decide which areas it was going in. So all of you, I would imagine, would think that you're probably working in one of those bold areas that I highlighted. If you're in an unbold area, you might want to think about it. Okay, so what happened in the end? So this is in the last evaluation, and I've only put up the scores here in the areas that I've highlighted, and what we get is our score, the score of the Australian averages for all the universities that submitted in those areas, the group of 8 averages, which is the cohort that we move against, and what our ranked position was in the country in those areas. So you can see that literary studies was fantastic. Top of the country. Yay, fantastic. 5, well above, this is perceived as well above world average and ranked in first place in the country. History is also strong. The performing and creative arts area also very strong. And all the other groups are okay and getting better. And I suspect actually that in our next evaluation, which will be in 2015, we'll see some movements and movements up in some of these areas, because this evaluation was for work between the period 2005 to 2010. The next one will be between 2008 and 2012. And there's a lot of things that have happened in the university in the intervening period in terms of new appointments and productivity and focus, etc. Nevertheless, these results, whether that you think they mean anything or not, create a meaning within the Australian sector. Because now, if you're putting in a grant application in the area of literary studies, you can claim that you come from a very strong research environment, and there's a lot of people around you that are working in this area, and for the federal government to subsequently fund into this area, that would be a good investment because there's a high probability of success in your future work. On the other hand, if you're putting in, from a university that didn't rate at all in literary studies because nobody does any work in literary studies at that university, then it's harder for you as an individual scholar to work in that sort of environment because you're all on your own. You don't have a culture and cohort around you. In the area in which all you guys work, the evaluation is done by peer review. In other words, we submit a body of work to a panel that reads it all and decides whether it's at world average, above world average, or well above world average. So effectively, I personally don't believe that they know what the world average is because they won't have read everything in the world. What they're effectively doing is ranking against the other submissions that they've got because that's their best estimate of average. The evaluation in the scientific areas is quite different, and it's based on citation data, and that really is world average citation data because that data is taken off the Scopus database. So they've got all the citations for the whole world's output in optical physics, and they can work out what the average citations are, and then you can figure out how our optical physics rates against the rest of the world. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about publishing then. So in the sciences, publishing mostly occurs in C1 refereed journal articles. Are you familiar with the categorisation of A1, B1, C1, E1? No? Yes? No? Good. I like it when people don't know things because I don't feel irrelevant then. So in Australia, every year we have to collect information about all the publications that have occurred in our university and report it to the federal government. And we report under 4 major categories. A1 is research monographs, and each year this university probably produces 25 to 30 research monographs, mostly in the arts faculty. B1 are book chapters, and we produce quite a lot of book chapters, so that's you all know about book chapters. C1 is refereed journal articles, so you submit papers to journals, they get refereed, they get published. Probably about 70% of the university's output is C1 journal articles. And then E1 is refereed conference papers. So people write a paper for a conference, go off to a conference and give it. Okay, so the sciences do mostly journal articles. Authors typically work in teams. Indeed, the average team size in the sciences over the last 10 years has moved from about 4 authors per paper to 10 authors on a paper. Now, Don't think, though, that most papers have 10 authors on them. Most papers probably have about 5 or 6. The reason the average has really moved up is because some parts of science have got to be very large teams. So if you're looking for the Higgs boson particle, you're probably working in a team of 200 people. If you're working on the human genome, you're probably working in a team of 200 people. In fact, the current world record for the number of authors on a journal article is well over 2,500 authors. Does sound rather ridiculous. You can't imagine what each author did, probably not even write one word. Nevertheless, it does tell you that the way in which knowledge is being created in some fields is changing, and science in general has to work in teams. So typically, scientists build on each other's work, and typically students in science publish early, publish with their supervisors, and publish with other people. In the humanities, though, it's different. So in our last ERA submission, about 37.5% of the output was in journals, 37.5% was in book chapters, so that's roughly 50-50. 20% was in referee conference papers, and about 5% is in monographs. Typically, in the humanities still, the average number of authors is about 1. So sometimes people publish with another person, and sometimes you get to see 2 or maybe even 3 authors on a paper. And some areas might differ a little bit from others, but generally the average across the world number of authors in humanities papers is stated about 1. That means that student output is not counted for ERA, and I'll tell you why, but it is counted for our international rankings. So for the international rankings, where they're looking to see what is counted for a university or not, the only thing they care about is the address on the paper. They don't really go and check whether you're employed by the university or not. It's the address on the paper. So students' output, honorary fellows' output, any collaborators all over the world, if they're writing with you and it's got our address on it, those papers count. So in international rankings, you can tell very quickly that it's not actually about the total productivity of a university as much as how embedded that university's activities is in the world's activities. The more a university is working with other universities and collaborating, the greater the total productivity, because you've got a lot more people out there publishing papers with you. Indeed, humanities journals in the international rankings are weighted at twice scientific journals, because everybody knows that these rankings are biased in favour of science, because that's what most of the journal indexing databases index. So every paper that's published in humanities and social science is actually twice a science paper, so well and truly valued. And indeed, one of the reasons why the ANU does so well in many of these rankings is because the ANU is a very strong humanities and social science university, and they publish a lot of journal articles in the humanities and social sciences at the ANU. Indeed, their most productive group at the ANU is economics. More than physics, more than geoscience, the economists are pumping out papers at the ANU. And so, as I said, sole authored student output doesn't count in the ERA. So if you write a journal article, it's in literary theory, it's not going to count. If you write one with your supervisor, though, it will count, because supervisor's output is counted. This is another reason why the sciences are sort of advantaged in ERA, because they get all the output of their staff plus all their students, because they all work together. That nobody really writes as a sole student over there. Okay, so student publication. So student output builds the total capacity of the university and counts towards our global reputation. And journal articles in particular add significantly because they are indexed. They're indexed on the major databases. They tend to be available in electronic form. They get picked up by a Google Scholar, and you gain citations from them, so that improves your reputation as well. Other forms of publication, including mainstream media, blogs, etc., help build our brand and our reputation. So as I said earlier, just because you publish doesn't mean to say that anybody actually reads it. So sometimes you have to do a little bit more than that in order to get your work read. So you might have to have a media release, you might have to write a blog, you might have to go to a conference, you might have to print out 100 copies of your paper and stick it in an envelope and post it to people and say, Happy Christmas, and maybe they'll read it. The next point I think is really, really important, and that is if you're going to graduate as a PhD student, you must graduate with a track record. If you don't have a track record in publication, you won't get a job as a researcher. End of story. You know, the days 30 years ago when you could get employed at a university without a single publication, over. And almost all of our students graduate with publications. And indeed, the university has a format of thesis submission, which is a thesis by publication. So if you publish along the way, you can take those publications and put them between an introductory and a concluding chapter and submit it as a thesis, and it gets judged as a thesis by publication. So, and in the sciences, many of our schools do their research training like that. Now, I know in the humanities, the monograph is God, and everybody wants to write a research monograph, but it takes a long time to write a research monograph, and most academics will do it after their PhD, not during their PhD. So some advice would be to consider writing co-authored work with your supervisors, other staff or collaborators from this university or others, and join in research and network so that your work, when it does get written and published, also gets read and cited. So I did look last night to see how many people in the arts faculty I could find on Google Scholar, and the answer was not very many, but I did go down. This is not a person in arts, this is a person in social sciences over in the business school, to show you what Google Scholar will do. So Google Scholar is some software that sits over the top of the internet that trawls through the whole internet and sees how many people have cited your work. So if your work is available in electronic form, it finds all other electronic documents that cite your work. Generally, most people will have more citations on Google Scholar than they will have on the Web of Knowledge or on Scopus, because the Web of Knowledge and Scopus only pick up citations from journals that they index, not from everything that's on the internet. So everything that's on the internet can include students' honours theses and policy documents that are made public, etc. So Google Scholar gives you a list of all your papers that goes on forever here, and how many times it's been cited and when the paper was published, and you can go in there and click on the cited things and find all the papers that ever cited your paper and try and figure out who's working on your work and who you should be writing to and collaborating with. And it gives you some idea of how your citations are picking up. So I did find someone in the arts faculty, Loretta, who has a very good citation record. There's her track record. It would be nice for the rest of the world to have a photograph, but I'm sure that can go up at some stage. Anyhow, there's absolutely no reason why everybody, even those that haven't started publishing yet, can't set up a Google Scholar profile, say what it is you do, and get yourself ready for being cited once that first thing comes out. And you might be surprised to find that something is already cited. It might have been a blog that you wrote at some stage and you didn't even know that somebody else has cited it. The humanities is an area that's particularly important in the QS rankings because they use the Scopus database, and that indexes a lot more humanities and social sciences papers than the Web of Knowledge does. And you might have seen in the press just in the last 2 days that QS has just brought out their subject rankings, and I thought I'd give you an idea of what that looks like for UWA. So this is the sort of email I get, a pie chart that looks like this that says, ta-da, this is how our various subject areas, 30 different subject areas, are ranked on QS. Well, the big news was that we had 3 areas, psychology, earth sciences, that should say earth sciences and marine science, missing, and education, all of which were ranked in the top 40 in the world. Now, do I believe it? Well, I believe it for psychology and earth sciences and marine sciences because they're also ranked very, very highly in ERA and in other areas. Education I'm less sure about, but I'm pleased that they're ranked so highly there. So what we have to do is go in and say, well, what does QS actually do? So QS uses peer review. So 50% of the evaluation in QS is done on reputation, academic peer review and employer recruiter review. So a lot of it is opinion. So I'm very pleased that people think very highly of our areas. They then look at student-staff ratio, citations per staff member, the proportion of international staff that you have at your university and the proportion of international students that you have at your university in these different areas. So you can see when you make up a measuring system that has different parameters, different things get measured. Anyhow, I thought you'd be very pleased to know that English language and literature, history and linguistics all got into the 50 to 100 range, which various of your colleagues must be celebrating today too. Not least of which because it's a good way of writing about the quality of the research environment in which you work, attracting future students, attracting future staff, etc. So let's just go on then to, you probably think at this stage I'm completely obsessed with rankings and all I really care about is numbers. This is exactly not the case at all. And the university's top 50 goal that the Vice-Chancellor will often talk about is not about any ranking system at all, because who knows what's going to happen in 2050, but I would bet my bottom dollar that none of these ranking systems will still exist by then. What really matters at this stage is that we as a university get better known and better embedded into the world's intellectual conversation in all of the disciplines in which we work. So what does that mean? Yep, we still want to try and improve our performance, and we'll continue to measure our performance over many different parameters, not just one or two, but many different, because whether they're the right ones or not, they all more or less correlate with the fact that we want to do high quality research that the rest of the world cares about, and when it comes to teaching, we want to have high quality teaching with a high quality teaching student experience and generate graduates that can go out there into the world and be people of influence. So overall, at this stage, the university is sitting here thinking probably our biggest problem is that our reputation is not as good as our performance. And in terms of what you might be able to do in that, not only just publishing in academic journals, but working as a cohort, forming clusters of excellence and working on your reputation in your various discipline areas will help generate a national and global reputation in specific areas. I think I'm at the end. I'm being told to go. That's our strategies. You don't really need to know about that, but it's all good for you. That's the end.